Well, good afternoon, everyone. The strength of our democracy depends upon clear lines between politics and law enforcement, between intelligence and criminal investigations, and most importantly, between the White House and the ballot box. What happened in Georgia last week erased those lines that are simply unacceptable. And this is even a more heightened concern after the President's comments last night. And let me be clear about why this matters. Regardless of what had been stated, this is not about the 2020 election. That election has been litigated, audited, recounted, and repeatedly upheld by courts and election officials, including lots and lots of Republican election officials. This is frankly about what comes next. It is deeply alarming that just yesterday the President called for Republicans, his words, to take over and nationalize voting in multiple states. That statement alone makes clear that this threat to our election security, the basic premise of our democracy, is forward-looking to 2026, into 2028, and candidly to the institutions that safeguard our democracy. This is about whether these same tactics we're seeing now, or worse, will be used to disrupt free and fair elections. One of the reasons why, as we think about ICE reform, the notion of roving ICE patrols parading around election polling stations is a very real and legitimate concern. And truthfully, as we've seen, whether the very institutions meant to protect our democracy will be misused to upheaval. So let's be clear. It is inappropriate for a sitting president to personally involve himself in a criminal investigation tied to an election he lost. It is inappropriate for the president to advocate for actions that are wholly at odds with the Constitution and 2.5 centuries of state and local elections. It is inappropriate for the Director of National Intelligence to insert herself into a domestic law enforcement operation far outside her statutory role. And it is profoundly inappropriate for either of them to blur the lines between intelligence, law enforcement, and partisan politics. But that is exactly what happened last week in Fulton County. As Vice Chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, I want to underscore a core legal boundary. U.S. intelligence agencies are structured to operate overseas, not on domestic soil. The National Security Act and other laws exist precisely to prevent election officials or intelligence officials from surveilling or intervening in domestic political matters. I may be the only one, well, maybe somebody else is old enough to remember that a lot of this came about because of actions of the Nixon administration back in the 60s. Those actions that literally resulted in the creation of the Oversight Committee that I now sit as chair and now vice chair. Because we know when intelligence personnel are inserted into domestic criminal investigation, especially one launched under such a thin veil of legitimacy, it raises serious legal and constitutional questions and politicizes an institution that must remain neutral and apolitical. The Director of National Intelligence does not conduct criminal investigations. She has no role in executing search warrants, and she does not belong on the scene of a domestic FBI search, particularly one tied to the President's personal grievances carried out under the pretense of normal law enforcement. Now, Director Gabbard argues that her presence was justified by, quote, broad statutory authority. But broad authority to analyze intelligence is not a license to participate in a sham investigation. And it certainly does not justify facilitating direct contact between the frontline FBI agents doing this investigation directly to the President of the United States. That phone call alone